I think it's time to start, and welcome to the afternoon session. I'd like first to introduce to you the lecturers. They are both, and as you noticed, maybe this course will have face-to-face part, which is today, but also an online part on the 11th, right? And you can check the details in the program later, but they will tell you as well. So we have a mixed international, nice international team. And first I will introduce the guest, Verginica Mititelu. And she's a linguist. Um, and she's a senior researcher at the Romanian Academy in the Institute for Artificial Intelligence. And what we can also see in her CV, she had her master and PhD degrees at the University of Bucharest. But for years now, she has been working in the area of language resources, and she's also interested in working on these resources for Romanian, because we should do work for Bulgarian like our colleagues, and Romanian, not only English, but also to she has experience in standardization of the resources that were developed, and also linking of resources, linked open data, which is also a very modern trend and very necessary trend, together with large language models. So she has been part of many international projects, and maybe I can share this part a bit with the next speaker with her, the Balkanet, about the Balkan WordNets, Clarin infrastructure, MetaNet for you, Accurat, and so on. All these projects are related to language technologies for many languages, not only one. Okay, so I know Verginica also from some time now, and we work together, as well as Ivelina later. I will introduce her in cost-action parsing, which was on parsing multi-word expressions. It seems very small problem, but believe me, it is really big problem in parsing and language processing. And it is very fortunate thing that nowadays we have this unidive cost action, and it combines these outward expressions and how they are processed in the framework of universal dependencies. But also they are interested in the interface between lexicon and grammar, and Verginica leads this package working group. The lexicon corpus interface. So this was the one introduction, and now I go to the other one. It is about Ivelina Stoyanova, who has been working at the Department of Computational Linguistics at the Institute for Bulgarian Language for some years now. And she has, it's a very good thing, she has degrees from different institutions. One is the Bulgarian Philology, Sofia University, where we met, actually. Then she did a bachelor's degree in computer science and mathematics. She has this degree from the University of Bath, UK. And she obtained her PhD degree from the Institute for Bulgarian Language in 2012. And we should mention that her thesis was focused on the multi-word expression recognition and tagging of Bulgarian. And I think it was maybe the first survey and the first work on this. And it's a reference work. I mean, whoever works on that should cite it. She also works actively on many projects. I mentioned most of them. And I should also mention in the end that she's also very active member of Unidive Action, Cost Action now, and she was very active also in the parsing cost action. And again, she was the responsible person for the Bulgarian part that was annotated with multi-word expressions. They first did the verbal ones, but now they had for the nominal and other others. Okay, so now you see that they are very into the topic they will present to you, and maybe it's just time to give the floor. Okay, thank you very much, Petya, for the nice introduction. So, as Petya already mentioned, this is a longer tutorial. We have 3 sessions today and 3 more on the 11th of September, and they will be online. Today, in the first session, we are going to cover about multi-word expressions, their definition, examples, some examples, characteristics, I'll present some lexical resources. Then in the second session, Eva will cover state-of-the-art of multi-word expressions identification in text. And in the last session, I will sort of prepare what we are going to do on Wednesday. Namely, we are going to look at the way in which we should annotate verbal multi-word expressions. We'll focus only on this now. So I hope until Wednesday morning you won't forget this, but anyway, we'll probably resume some of the most important aspects on Wednesday morning. Okay, so this is the plan for today. I think we'll manage to cover everything. We'll start with the definition of multi-word expressions, of course, which, as Petya mentioned in the previous tutorial, is, well, with natural language, actually, the definition of any phenomenon is not easy. And multi-word expressions are no exception to this. They were defined by Nicoletta Calzolari in 2002 as a sequence of words that act as a single unit at some level of linguistic analysis. The focus is on this phrase, a single unit. So, although they are made up of several words, they should be considered as one entity, one unit of analysis. A few years later, Baldwin and Kim described or defined multi-word expressions as being lexical items that can be decomposed into multiple lexemes, and they display lexical, syntactic, semantic, pragmatic, and or statistical idiomaticity. So we see that we go a bit further from the linguistic level of analysis. We have some frequency also involved in this last part of the definition. This term of idiomaticity should be understood as markedness or deviation from some basic properties that the lexemes making up the multi-word expressions have. Now, what we should remember from these two definitions is that a multi-word expression is a combination of at least 2 words, and they exhibit these idiosyncrasies at various linguistic levels, plus the frequency level when we have a corpus, of course. Now, so the definition that was commonly agreed upon within the Parsim action that Petya mentioned before. Should I explain what Parsim is? Well, this was cost action. These are like projects, let's say, which are funded by the European Commission under a specific track where there is money for having people gathering together and discussing problematic aspects of their work, finding solutions to different problems. So there is some money allocated to these projects, to these actions they are called, but for people to
to create large networks in which they try to find solutions to different current problems in the respective community. It's not development, a proper research problem, but these actions can actually help research and development projects. Parsim was such an action that they last for 4 years, and this one was during the, well, I don't know exactly the period. It ended in 2017, I think. So it started in 2013 because there were some months with which the project, the action was extended, and we already have for 2 years a new such action, which is like a follow-up of this one, but this is called Unidive. But in this action, in this new action, two communities are, actually three communities are brought together, the former Parsim, the universal dependencies, which is focused on offering the principles of syntactic annotations that are valid for all languages, so it targets universality, and also the community of linguists who focus on different peculiarities of various languages. I lack now the term. So there is a certain branch in linguistics that studies the peculiarities of various languages. I really cannot find the term now. But if you check the Unidive website, you'll find there. So within Parsim, this is the definition that was agreed upon by the members, and this is also taken over in the new action. So we have a combination of at least two words that exhibit idiosyncrasies at various linguistic levels. Well, even this definition is problematic because we have this notion of words, and as linguists, we know that a word is hard to define, not only for languages that not for those Asian languages that use do not use a proper alphabet like the European ones, but even for European languages, there are situations when a word is hard to define. That's why there is this, let's say, equivalence between a word and the lexeme. So words here should be understood as a lexeme, a basic unit of a lexicon, so a unit which can be assigned the meaning, a form. And when you process natural language, there is another term that appears that is usually used by specialists, namely the token. This is the basic unit in automatic language processing. Well, we can say that a word, yeah, in this definition should be understood as a lexeme, which is rather the same as a token. But because I didn't use there the equal sign, this means there is no one-to-one correspondence all the time. Because we have, for instance, compounds, which are treated in lexicography, for instance, as one lexeme. But these are actually in the automatic analysis multi-word tokens. And in language, we find, for instance, contractions like isn't in English, which in the automatic processing of language you should split into different words. So they will be treated as different tokens as well. Sometimes such strings of letters are not that transparent. If we look at, for instance, at that last example, which is from French, we have this O, which is actually the result of putting together a and le, so the preposition and the definite article. So again, in automatic analysis, this should also be split. This O in those two components, those two words. So you have one token, but you have one word, but actually you have two tokens there, yeah? Another problematic term in this definition is idiosyncrasies, which means a strange or unusual habit or way of behaving or feature. Again, this is not something very clear or very clearly defined or not always understood in the same way but by different specialists. So we assume this, let's say, drawbacks of the definition. And the linguistic levels that are considered are those that were also mentioned before, the lexical, morphologic, syntactic, semantic, and pragmatic level. The last one being not so well studied within these two actions and in the community in general. The most important characteristic that is considered an idiosyncrasy of multi-word expressions is the fact that they are semantically non-compositional. So in the example given there, rock music isn't really my cup of tea. We have this string, cup of tea, and when we try to understand this sentence, of course, we need to understand the meaning of the whole sentence by considering the meanings of the words making it up. However, the last three words shouldn't be understood with their meanings, but they should be treated as one unit which has a certain meaning. Yeah, so rock music isn't my favorite type of music, is the understanding. Of course, all these things were all reported or described in the literature many years ago by linguists. It's not something that automatic processing or new generations of linguists have come up with. So in the 60s, Katz and Postal wrote this, that the essential feature of an idiom, but they refer only to idioms, so you see that multi-word expressions actually cover more than idioms, is that its full meaning, and more generally the meaning of any sentence containing an idiomatic stretch, is not the compositional function of the meaning of the idiom's elementary parts. So, cup of tea has a different meaning than the components. After giving a definition to multi-word expression, the community focused on classifying them. And we have here a classification with, so the major types of multi-word expressions and also some subtypes. Of course, they because syntax and parsing was also interested in parsing. So in syntax, all these categories are syntax driven. So we have verbal multi-word expressions, nominal ones, adjectival, adverbial, prepositional, conjunctions, and so on and so forth. Because as reported in the linguistic literature, we have multi-word expressions for all parts of speech. If there are some gaps in some languages, those are exceptions, but otherwise each part of speech can display some multi-word expressions. We have classification, sub-classification, let's say, of these two major, maybe the richest classes, the verbal and nominal ones. Let's say we will adjust it further on in the presentation. We have light verb constructions here, give a lecture. Why are they called light verbs, light verb constructions? Well, because the meaning of this multi-word expression is not non-transparent. It's rather transparent. But the problem with the meaning here is that the verb doesn't bring much information, doesn't contribute a lot, sometimes doesn't contribute at all to the meaning of the expression. It's only the noun which contributes the semantics of the expression. Now, to give a lecture is actually to lecture. We also have this noun in English. Idioms These are probably the most spectacular in the sense that their meaning is not compositional at all. And we have plenty of examples in all languages. One such example here, to let the cat out of the dog, of the bed, sorry, which means to reveal a secret. A phrasal verb which English abounds in, but other languages do not have such types of multi-word expressions. I think Bulgarian doesn't, just like Romanian and many other languages actually. With nominal expressions, we have compounds. Well, a problematic category maybe, because some linguists wouldn't treat them as multi-word expressions. There are also different norms in writing them as one word, or using some hyphens, or using even a blank there. So they are problematic in this respect. We have terms which also are problematic because people tend to analyze, or linguists would say this belongs to terminology, not to lexicography. Then we also have idiomatic multi-word expressions like piece of cake. This is probably the canonical example of nominal multi-word expressions. And there are examples of other parts of speech, of multi-word expressions of other parts of speech. Okay. Now, regarding their characteristics, we are going to look at various linguistic levels and mention what is peculiar about these multi-word expressions at these levels. But the lexical one, of course, not all expressions have the same characteristics. So some of them are displayed by some multi-word expressions, others are displayed by other multi-word expressions. But remember that the general characteristics is that they are semantically non-compositional. For instance, what could happen at the lexical level is that one of the components of the multi-word expression occurs only within that expression in the language. We cannot use it outside that string of words. In English, for instance, well, we have ad hoc, which is not made up of English words, of course, and they do not occur in English outside this expression or outside other expressions, because sometimes there are components that occur only in several expressions, but not alone in the languages, other words do. Maybe more English specific example is go astray, made up of English words, but astray is not used outside without go, I mean. Yeah. So whenever we find such a string, we consider it a multi-word expression because we have these cranberry words, they are called, so they do not occur, we do not use them in language outside these expressions. Yeah? And this term, cranberry words, is rather new in the literature. It happened to me once when I submitted a paper this year to a major conference, actually, to have a review in which the reviewer contested the usage of this word, of this term, saying that nobody used it, but actually in the community we do use it. Maybe it's not spread enough, but it will probably become if we continue using it in our papers and when we disseminate our work. Another lexical characteristic of multi-word expression is the lack of flexibility of one or of more components in the expression. We have here two examples, hot dog and hot soup. Hot dog is a multi-word expression, whereas hot soup is a regular combination of words in the language. Well, if we try to replace the adjective hot with other words, synonyms or not, they could be antonyms, words that can occur in that syntactic position. So other adjectives from the same, let's say, semantic field. For instance, cold. you can safely say cold soup, but you cannot say a cold dog to refer to this kind of food. Or you cannot replace the noun in the string. Hot husky, for instance, you cannot say this, although husky is a hyponym of dog. But you can say hot pizza. Well, maybe I should have said there hot tripe soup, as it was mentioned at lunch today, or hot chicken soup, or something like this. Yeah. So I replace. I mean, it's not really parallel the examples because husky would be a hyponym, let's say, of dog, whereas pizza is not a hyponym of soup. Now, at the morphological level, we also have this lack of flexibility or inflexibility of some components. Again, we have this time I don't have one example of a multi-word expression and another of a regular combination of words. This time both are multi-word expressions, so both goat, bananas, and kick the bucket are multi-word expressions. And in both of them, you can see that the noun cannot be used in a different number, with a different number than we regularly use this expression. So you cannot say about someone that he or she goes banana. Only bananas, yeah? Go crazy about, I don't know, hearing some news or something. People kick the buckets, they never kick the buckets when we mean they pass away, yeah? Sometimes these multi-word expressions preserve older forms of words. And for instance, in Romanian, we have this expression, a pune pe roate, which means to make something work. And in this expression, we use this old plural form of the noun will, roată, which is roate, because the plural form of roată today is roți. A car has several roți, several form. Okay, so they preserve archaic forms of words. At the syntactic level, there are several characteristics that they display. We have sometimes strange combinations of words. For instance, in the first example, where we have a coordination, we have a preposition and an adjective that are coordinated. And we know that in language, we coordinate elements of the same type. Now we coordinate nouns, we coordinate verbs, but not different parts of speech. Or if we coordinate different parts of speech at the syntactic level, they behave the same. But here, this is strange for the characteristics of the language. That's why this is a multi-word expression considered. This combination functions as an adverb. Then there are sometimes contrary to the rules of the syntactic rules of the language, some phenomena are not allowed. For instance, in this structure, in addition to, we have a noun, but it can never get the definite article, as other nouns in such syntactic combination do. For instance, if we compare in addition to it in the address to the nation of a president, let's say, yeah. Well, there we need or in an address to the nation, yeah. So we have either the definite or the indefinite or other determiners, yeah, can occur there. But here in this expression in addition to, we cannot have either on, the, or other determiners. In the next example, in kick the bucket, we see that the bucket, even if it's a noun, it cannot be modified by an adjective. So someone cannot kick the rusty bucket when we mean they die, yeah, or another kind of bucket. Expressions are used with a certain word order most of the times. There are exceptions, of course, but the word order is should be considered rather fixed whenever they are short. For instance, we say drink and drive, but not drive and drink. There are some rhyming problems also, so stylistics also study this phenomenon. And some syntactic transformations that are allowed in language are blocked actually with multi-word expressions. So kick is a transitive verb, so we have a subject and a direct object. But in this construction, we cannot pacify the direct object. Although if if we use this sequence of words in the proper meaning, I kick the bucket, yeah, meaning that I really hit it with my leg, I can say the bucket was kicked by me. But when I mean someone kicked the bucket, someone died, I cannot specify. I cannot say the bucket was kicked by X, meaning that he died. The semantic level, we mentioned non-compositionality, which is, of course, not easy. Because, as mentioned before with light verb constructions, this is a matter of scale. So some expressions are totally opaque from the words they contain. You cannot tell what they mean. Others are rather close to the meaning of the words making them up. And here in the example, I have a decreasing, let's say, level of compositionality, of non-compositionality, with cost an arm and a leg being opaque and phone book being rather transparent. So you could say what a phone book is as a person. I imagine nobody imagines it's a book full of phones, yeah? So it's a book with phone numbers. Whereas cost an arm and a leg, someone who hadn't met it before couldn't. Well, the context helps us, of course, but if you read it outside the context, you cannot say what it means, probably. Okay. Well, at the pragmatic level, which I told you is not so widely, well, pragmatics is not that widely studied in NLP because of the difficulties it raises. But still, what problems are there? So there is an association where we use, not tend, as a rule, we use some expressions in certain circumstances. So there is this association between multi-word expressions and the communication circumstances. For instance, when we greet someone, depending on the moment of the day, we use a certain greeting, or depending on the moment, if we meet or if we leave someone. So at the beginning or at the end of the meeting. And there's one more example linked to, or depending on traveling. So when trains or ships are about to start the journey, you can hear this all aboard message. Why are linguists interested in studying multi-word expressions? Well, there are a lot of reasons besides these linguistic challenges that I showed. Besides the fact that they preserve older forms of the language, they will also preserve some history, we could say. For instance, English is not my mother tongue, and even for the multi-word expressions in my mother tongue, I'm not always aware of their origin. You know that there are researchers who invest, or at least in Romania, I know someone who spent all his life working on this to find out the origins of of many, not some, idioms. For instance, for spill the beans, they say that it has to do with ancient Greek elections, where in which they used some bins and which they put in some recipients, and to spill those recipients or the bins in those recipients meant to reveal who was the winner actually. So to spill the beans means to reveal a secret, something that was hidden before. So it was secret voting, yeah. And spilling those herbs probably meant revealing who the winner of the elections was. Sometimes I think we do it every day probably. We prefer using these expressions because they are more relevant when we speak, when we want to put through a certain message. And it saves time to give a long explanation. So, Proverbs, for instance. Easier said than done here. So instead of explaining someone in a lot of words, you use the proverb and they should understand you. Sometimes these idioms usually are associated with a certain connotation. I still have some time, right? Yes, okay. So they are associated with a connotation, and you can see there that a barrel of laughs in English has a positive connotation. If I say about someone that Maya, for instance, was a barrel of laughs, this means that the long drive we had together was quite quick because we didn't get bored. Whereas, for instance, fed up, I'm really fed up, has a negative connotation. Well, they are also problematic, these multi-word expressions for speakers. And what I noticed as a mother of a teenager, I could say that there is also a difference between generations. Because younger generations are not so much exposed to this multi-word, to idioms, to proverbs, or maybe they are creating new ones. So they are not able to understand those that they encounter when they read a text, or when someone older talks to them. They look strange and they require some explanation. So they are not easy even for native speakers of different generations. For learners of a language, they are of course problematic, as you all know here. And besides this, there is also this linguistic creativity which is involved, and speakers of a language always modify them. So although we say that some modifications of the nouns are blocked, well, creative speakers do this, and this is for sometimes these are plays upon words, so for fun, jokes, and so on and so forth, but they happen in language, and probably usually in our free time, but also in newspapers. The journalistic language, I think, it depends on the topic, maybe, but they abandon such modifications of multi-word expressions. They are, as Ivan will show in the next session, they are problematic for processing, for automatic processing of language, and also for translation. Well, I showed some examples previously that tell us that even if we have at the syntactic level the same structure, we can work with two different expressions, two different types of structures, let's say, in the language. So when the syntax of an expression is that of a regular construction, as you can see here, we have to pay attention to the other aspects to distinguish between regular constructions and multi-word expressions. Here there are examples of different syntactic structures for which in the language we can only a few, this is not a comprehensive list of syntactic structures that are shared by regular constructions and multi-word expressions. but the phenomenon exists in the language and we should pay attention to it. Well, besides the, let's say, proper characteristics, that there are other characteristics that become visible when we talk about multi-word expressions in context. So not as mere lists of expressions, because when we use them, they tend, for instance, to be discontinuous sometimes, as in the first example. So bear in mind is one expression, but in between the verb and the prepositional phrase, there is a lot of linguistic material that appears. But we still must be able automatically to retrieve these components of the multi-word expression and to recognize them. We have the interleaving phenomenon, to take the fact that I gave up into account. So we have give up one expression inside another one, to take something into account. Yeah. So we have discontinuity to take into account our discontinuous, but in between them we also have another multi-word expression. Multi-word tokens were mentioned at the beginning. I will skip this. And also we have flexibility, on the morphological, syntactic, or lexical level. For instance, in English we say he broke my fall, but we cannot say both of my falls were hard to. Well, if we say this, it has proper meaning. No, so not a non-compositional one, a compositional one. Well, with respect to collocations, I would say a few words. In general, when dealing with multi-word expressions, the community, let's say, do not have the same view on all phenomena. And maybe the most visible one is this distinction between multi-word expressions and collocations, which with different scientists can be treated differently. So either, as you can see in the first picture here, yeah, multi-word expressions are considered one class, one subtype, let's say, of collocations, or vice versa, where collocations are one subtype of multi-word expressions, or they all partially overlap, or they are totally distinct entities in the language. So different opinions. I will briefly go through a few lexical resources containing multi-word expressions. So these are electronic descriptions of a language in which words, lexemes are described. And we know from our, let's say, lexicography, each national lexicography, that there are dictionaries of multi-word expressions, and they have been created for decades, I would say. But the focus so far was on their meaning. So there was a list of multi-word expressions which are explained. Their meaning is explained, sometimes even with a long history of their origin, evolution, and so on. But this was the trend, let's say, so far. But nowadays, when we talk about multi-word expression lexicons, we tend to include information at various linguistic levels. They sometimes appear in a valence dictionary. So for multi-word expression, just like for normal words, verse, for instance, you also mention what valences, syntactic valences they can take. But we can also have some dedicated resources. And here the method of creation differs from one team to another, from one language to another. It depends on the purpose the respective lexicon is created for. Sometimes they cover several languages, not only one. Sometimes there are lexicons in which Each expression is described at various linguistic levels individually. There are others, especially a Dutch lexicon, in which there are classes syntactically created, or classes relying on the syntactic structure of multi-word expression. So there are classes which share some characteristics, and each expression is assigned to a certain class. And usually, because this is a lexicon, exceptions are rather registered than rules, because we say that rules are described by the grammar of the language, and the lexicon should contain only the exceptions to these rules. These are the levels of linguistic descriptions. They were mentioned, most of them were mentioned previously. What's new here is probably the derivational level, part of morphology, but still, morphology, derivation and inflection. I talked only about inflection previously. Contextual aspects. There are sometimes links between the lexicon and the corpus, so you can see the expression in action, so to say. So you can see how it occurs, how it is used by speakers. And sometimes they are also assigned some register, so you can figure out if that expression is preferred in a certain style, it has a certain connotation, and so on and so forth. These are a few examples, probably of the, except for the last, were Lemur, created by a Czech team, again, Czech, Prague, as Petia mentioned before. So this is a very large lexicon of multi-word expressions for Czech. For Dutch, we have Ducame, which is the follow-up, I'd say, of Duelme, a previous version. This is also enlarged, of course. Edian, which was developed for Greek. And we can also say that as one result, because we have more, of the collaboration between the Bulgarian and the Romanian team, we also have a multi-word expression lexicon, which is quite rich in the sense that there are a lot of linguistic levels included, but not rich as the number of expressions is within the dictionary is concerned, but it's only the beginning. This is an example from our dictionary of two expressions. Well, actually, there are two sets of expressions, because what our dictionary has and no other such resource reported so far has, is the fact that we use our word nets, which are aligned to each other via the English word net. And this makes the retrieval of semantically equivalent expressions in the two languages quite easy. You can see here two synonyms, so two expressions in Bulgarian that have the same meaning, and three semantically equivalent ones in Romanian. And then in the table you can see their descriptions at various linguistic levels. It's not a comprehensive description, as I previously said. We follow that trend that only idiosyncrasies are marked in the dictionary, not those elements that follow the language rules. So that are not problematic, actually. Yeah, so the well-behaved elements are left out. These are further materials that could be studied, and also this course is based on the last course available there. And some references, and I think we are done with the first session.
With the second session of our tutorial, I will talk a little bit about the process of multi-word expression identification. As Verginica already mentioned, and Petra also before her, that we share our work within the parsing cost action, and also its sort of continuation, the Unidive cost action. And what we were doing there, focusing on multi-word expression and their treatment, the development of lexical resources, and how these were applied for the purposes of multi-word expression identification. So I won't be talking in general, but focusing mostly on what we have done. So what are the challenges? Why do we still work on multi-word expressions? Why is it such a big deal, and why is it so difficult to deal with them? What was said before, the challenge is basically in their idiosyncratic nature. So they behave not as just the usual combination of two or more words, but they behave in a different way. And idiomaticity can be expressed at different levels: lexical, morphosyntactic, syntactic, semantic, and so on. And at each of these levels, there are a number of challenges that we need to address, both in developing lexical resources, but also in corpus annotation, and also when we are developing natural language processing applications. So how do we deal with multi-word expressions, and how do we address all these levels of idiomaticity where we see them? So from a practical point of view, just focusing on the practical point, as was already discussed, they may appear within with a different word order. So for verbal multi-word expression, the verb can be the first part or can appear at the end. The components may not be adjacent, so there may be other words, other parts of the sentence that appear between the parts of the multi-word expression, and also even more complicated, there may be some modifiers that appear to one of the words of the multi-word expressions. For example, we can make a decision, or we can make a difficult decision, or we can even make a very difficult decision, and so on. So we can modify components of the multi-word expression. And how far can we get? I mean, how far can we get with this process, and what is then the multi-word expression? So are these three different multi-word expressions, or is it just one? And how do we represent this in a lexical resource? Do we allow certain modifiers? Do we allow certain variations within the multi-word expression? Or do we consider them different multi-word expressions? And how do we treat them when we start processing the text? How do we deal with them? Also, as again was already mentioned, the phenomenon of multi-word expression covers a wide range of different types and degrees of idiomaticity. So, okay, some of them may be completely opaque, while some of them may be transparent to a certain degree. So from which point do we consider an expression to be a multi-word expression rather than just a pre-combination of words? The example with phone book, is it a multi-word expression? Because okay, it contains phone numbers, but it is not fully described what it contains. So for some people, it may be completely clear, but in a few years, maybe there won't be, they won't look like a book. So then, is it still transparent as an expression, or is it already turning into a multi-word expression? Okay, another example, maybe if we consider the example of polar bear. So is it transparent, or because okay, we can say, okay, this is a bear which lives on the North Pole, but it doesn't really live on the North Pole itself. Its habitat is much larger, and it is near the North Pole, but it's not exactly the North Pole. So to what degree is it transparent to every speaker of the language? Or, for example, in Bulgarian, the expression is white bear. So the equivalent of polar bear is white bear. So is it transparent because it's white? Well, it turns out that its fur is not actually white, it's more transparent, so it appears to be white. So is it a free combination of words? Because everyone can understand that it is a bear which looks white, okay, but it's also the term that names the species. So in this case, it's not completely transparent. So to what degree is this transparency actually transparent or not? Also, another challenge is in terms of the morphologically rich, for morphologically rich language, where there are a lot of different forms. Some of them, for example, if we consider the head of the expression, which is maybe one of the most important components, then, for example, in Bulgarian, another morphologically rich language, there are a lot of different forms. So, do we consider all of them to be to represent the multi-word expression, or do we just take the full meaning words out of these forms? How do we deal with them? So here I'm mostly raising questions. I'm not giving any answers because they are. This is what we are trying to do. Basically, we pose all these questions within these cost actions, and we're trying to find some answers for some of them, and for most of them, we're still not not finding these answers. Also, problematic are expressions which can appear both as a multi-word expression or have a literal meaning. As one of the examples was a piece of cake. So it can be a literal piece of cake, or it can be like in the context where it's something is a piece of cake, an activity is a piece of cake, then it is in a multi-word. It is a multi-word expression. I already mentioned that there might be a degree of variability within the multi-word expression. Some components might be able to take modifiers. Also, multi-word expressions, they are language dependent. So they're specific to a particular language, to a particular culture. In our work on Bulgarian and Romanian, we discovered there are a lot of multi-word expressions that are common. I mean, that are formed in the same way in Bulgarian as well as in Romania, which is explained with the closeness of the communities and the cultures as well. But these are to a high degree language dependent. So they are a challenge for foreign language learners to understand them, to acquire them, and sometimes even for younger generations, they lose the sense of the metaphor that brought the multi-word expression meaning. So from partly transparent, it can turn into completely opaque for people, even for people who are native speakers. And especially what we, in the context of computational linguistics, the biggest challenge is for the computers to understand them. First of all, for the computers to identify them, to see which they are in a text, and then to interpret them, to make sense of them in the sense that to somehow decide what their semantics is, and after that to by, for example, translate them. So for machine translation, multi-word expressions are still a big challenge, even with large language models and so on, as we will see in a bit. And also another challenge that was the focus of these cost actions that brought together people from different countries, from different linguistic traditions, was the challenge that multi-word expressions were treated differently in different linguistic traditions. So the idea behind the cost actions in general and these ones in particular was to see how different linguists treated them and to find some ways to bring together knowledge from different perspectives and to find maybe better solutions for multi-word expressions. And so one of the goals of the PARS team action was actually to just not develop just the theoretical side of things, the discussion of the idiomatic nature of multi-word expressions and their types of idiomaticity, but also to address in a uniform way the way they are treated, so that to facilitate the computational processing, things like machine translation and so on. So here I just listed a few approaches that generally can be found in the literature that deal with multi-word expression and mostly from a computational point of view. And these approaches, some of them, and that was more the focus of like 20 years ago, where they were addressed, their treatment was addressed with resource light approaches. So to say, applying like statistical measures, measures that measure the association between words in like big raw corpora data and so on. So on the other side, mostly developed by people with background in linguistics, were resource-based approaches. So people who are saying, okay, we can't deal with them without the lexicons. We need to develop large lexica of multi-word expression, describe them from all possible perspectives, and that's how we deal with them. And then also machine learning, distributional methods, which basically compare the distribution of the multi-word expression and separately the distribution of its components with the purpose to identify where they behave differently and to identify cases of multi-word expressions. But still identifying them doesn't give doesn't provide their meaning. What their meaning is. We can identify that something doesn't behave regularly, but we can't say what its meaning is. So even with these vector-based approaches, word embeddings, and so on, it is difficult to properly, fully, solve the problems of multi-word expressions. I think that we already saw, like with statistical methods and multi-word expressions versus collocations. So the collocation side of multi-word expression is just one side of the things. And as we saw, one side of the idiomaticity was the statistical correlation between the words that appear together as a multi-word expression. But that's just one side of it. And a lot of researchers actually say, okay, let's distinguish between collocations and multi-word expression and focus on those collocations that have also another level of idiomaticity. For example, the semantic level, which is basically causing a problem, because even like for a basic collocation, like for example, order a pizza or order a takeaway. It's not a problem to translate it literally. But if we have multi-word expression, then we need to treat it as a whole and translate it in a completely different way. So just a few words about like large language models and the place of multi-word expressions within them. I just briefly mentioned that basically, although I mean the big rise of large language models and multi-word expressions still stay a problem for them, and also what the most recent sort of trends within these is to basically also involve linguistic information in building the models, in treating these specific linguistic phenomena, which are not, they are not very frequent, they are not very well behaved. So to treat them with a focus on the linguistic information that they provide. And so these are two sources that basically focus on what can be done better for multi-word expressions in training and in using large language models. And a few years ago, there was a paper, a position paper, which came from people who are heavily involved in the Parsim action, who basically, the title of the paper states the position that without lexicons, multi-word expression identification will never fly, which basically what their feeling was that even in the context of big data and large models and so on, without the lexical resources providing linguistic description of multi-word expressions, we won't be able to solve that problem, at least, and especially for low resource languages. So maybe to some extent, for example, English or German, maybe, but not for low resource languages. And also they insist on lexical resources which are developed together with annotated corpora multi-word expressions, so that to work towards solving the problem of their treatment. But then we reach the point where we need to develop these resources, to develop these lexical resources, and to develop these annotated corpora with multi-word expressions. And we reach the point where it requires a lot of work. It is a very time-consuming and very expensive task to develop resources, and also how big corpora, how big lexical resources, how many multi-word expressions. And also it appears that multi-word expressions, they are not a fixed quantity in the language. All the time, some of them are not used anymore. Some new multi-word expressions appear. So it is a constant race against time to develop these resources. And also the annotation of corpora, we took part with my colleagues in Parsim, and we annotated the corpus there, and it took a lot of time. And not only that, but it took a lot of time, a lot of effort to decide on the annotation procedures and to agree on categories of multi-word expressions and so on. So this is what Verginica will talk about in the next session, about these guidelines that were developed within Parsim to ensure that these corpora that are annotated there, that come from this effort, are annotated in a consistent way and uniformly across different languages. And then, on the other hand, we can have resources of discovered multi-word expressions. So, for example, if we work with corpora, we can identify their multi-word expressions, although not knowing their meaning or although missing information about them. We can extract from corpora and use them to train applications and to extract information, description from them to use for further development in the field. So that's basically another approach that we can address the need for more resources, like working with both corpora and lexical resources and bringing them together so that we can develop more and more resources. And just a few words about efficiency and what in recent years started to be a topic of research and started to be a topic of discussion, because with these large models and also before that with big data and so on, it brought the question of how reasonable is that? I mean, because some of the large models, they require a lot of computational power, a lot of resources to compile and to develop and so on. And these large artificial intelligence models and so on require a lot of resources. So some authors already raised the question to sort of discuss, at least in the community, to discuss the reasoning about the interaction of different resources while taking the different phases of the life cycle of a model or of an application into account. So to decide how efficient a model is based on how useful it is, rather than just develop larger and larger and larger models. And in some papers also, it's discussed, the efficiency is discussed as, the state of art is described as Pareto state of art. Because what the Pareto principle is that basically 20% of the resources will cover 80% of the data. So do we need 80% of the resources that cover just 20% of the data? So how, I mean, after this, we develop this 20% and we cover 80%, do we need more? And how much more until we cover 100%? But at some point it becomes inefficient. So at what point do we stop with that process? But on the other hand, especially in the context of language, so do we leave less frequent language phenomena out of the research that we do? I mean, do we still focus on them? And especially with multi-word expressions, some of them are rare. So do we still deal with them, or do we just skip them and just leave them out of our researches and of what we are focused on? So also that's a question without an answer. Just the question that we need to ask ourselves when we develop language resources: how far are we willing to get? And so a few words in the context of this, a few words about the parsing corpora and the shared tasks. So the parsing corpora were developed on various languages, the languages that had teams who were willing to put effort into annotating corpora within the action. And the main idea was to cover as many languages as possible. And also, not only that, but to cover them in a uniform way, so that develop resources that are basically, that can be used cross-linguistically, that can be used for multilingual NLP tasks. And at the beginning, the first corpus that was developed in 2017 included 18 languages, Then they were gradually increased. In 2020, they were just 14 because, as I mentioned, they were developed so that these data that were annotated were provided as training and testing data for a shared task each time. And in 2020, the shared task was just focusing on 14 languages. But these are basically the corpora, the initial 18 corpora for 18 languages were enlarged and included more different texts and so on, more multi-word expressions as well. But basically, and they were used in these shared tasks. You can basically, I think I included some links that you can go and see the results of these shared tasks and which systems performed better and so on. Some of the systems focus on one language, some of the systems focus on multiple languages, and you can compare the results. Also, there were like closed and open tracks in the shared tasks, and like the closed using just the training data that were provided, and others that use additional resources, additional methods, and so on. So a link to the corpora, and because these corpora needed to be annotated in a uniform way, parsing teams focused on developing parsing guidelines for annotating multi-word expressions, as Vergi will focus on those in a minute. But I just wanted to mention that their goal was to like offer a unified approach for annotation. So basically, they focused on the big picture in the sense that at the end, there were like a few major categories of multi-word expressions, for example, idioms, light word constructions, and a few others. And they focused on the major categories of multi-word expression rather than like which are basically valid for most of the languages, rather than focusing on language specific categories. But then some teams worked on their language specific categories of multi-word expressions as well, so that their effort is not just focused on the parsing corpora, but just to have a resource that is applicable for their language. And the idea of the guidelines is to ensure that every time you apply these guidelines for a given multi-word expressions, you come up with the same category. So, of course, there were cases which are like borderline, and sometimes you can decide one or the other. For that purpose, each language team, first of all, they had a discussion, and second of all, their inter-annotator agreement was calculated for each team to see whether there is a lot of variation within a language, or people generally agree on the procedure and the guidelines. So the guidelines themselves are very useful resource, and not only because they give like the tests that you apply step by step to come up with a category with whether an expression is multi-word expression, and to come up with its category of multi-word expression, but also it contains a lot of examples for all these languages. So Bulgarian is somewhere in the middle, Romanian is one of the top with most number of examples, and so on. So you can go through the guidelines and see the tests applied for a particular language, and see, see how these rules are implemented. I still have few minutes. Just to mention that I just wanted to mention the two winners of the most recent shared task. Not most recent, I don't know if there was one. No, okay, yeah, in 2020. So one of the winners, so these two systems are the winners. One of the winners was scene to scene, which was in the closed track, and the other MTL struct was in the open track. So some information about each of these systems. And they basically performed quite well, but they also included some morphosyntactic and some syntactic information, used some morphosyntactic and some syntactic information in order to identify, to improve the results of the multi-word expression identification. And here we're talking about the verbal multi-word expression identification. So just as a summary, the goals of PARSIM and its extension was the development of guidelines, and also now the guidelines of verbal multi-word expressions. And now within the unit of cost action, a group of people are working on the nominal multi-word expression classifications as well. And also people are looking to cover other types of multi-word expressions that have not been covered so far, to improve cross-lingual analysis and so on. And so the questions that I raised earlier on in the presentation, how do we represent and how do we treat different levels of idiomaticity in corpus annotation, in lexical resources, in representing multiple expressions in lexical resources, and do we apply the same approach to all types of multi-word expressions, or we decide for certain types that we need a lexical resource to treat them, and for other types that we basically can rely on automatic methods without developing resources for them. For example, for light verb constructions, the most frequent verbs in the language can appear as de-semanticized verbs, light verbs, and combined with some nouns that have particular meaning, they can appear in light verb constructions. So do we need to include all possible light verb constructions in lexical resources as well, or can we rely on sort of a tailored approach towards different categories? And also consider the multi-word expression, any type of approach that we consider towards multi-word expression identification, we need to consider it also in terms of efficiency. And also some references here that you can go over. So that's from me.
So, welcome back to the last session of today. So I will focus now on the way in which we can start annotating, and we will focus only on verbal multi-word expressions. That's because this is the only category for which we have stable guidelines. The others do exist, but we haven't tested them yet to make sure they can work smoothly for all languages involved. Well, This annotation process is a two-step one. First of all, we need to identify a string of words that is a candidate multi-word expression, and then we have to classify this according to the annotation schema that we use, and to the unified annotation guidelines. For this, we are going to use a decision tree, which is meant to help us overcome these difficult cases, ensure reproducibility, but also be consistent with ourselves throughout the annotation process, be consistent with other annotators, and be consistent among languages that are involved in this whole process of creating a corpus of annotated multi-word expressions. So the idea was to offer a universal framework for the multi-word expressions identification, considering different characteristics that languages show. Well, so considering their diversity. Well, it's a universal framework, but it allows for bringing into the foreground also elements that are specific to one language family, or to some languages. So how do we establish that a certain string of words could be a multi-word expression? Well, the first step is actually reading the guidelines that exist, reading or being involved in their development. So we are sort of aware of what we are looking for. And then when we read a sentence, let's say, we rely on our intuition of native speakers, because I think, with one exception, English, imagine, all annotators were native speakers, except for English, where native speakers could not be found initially. I don't know if now the English corpus is annotated by native English speakers, but there was a problem with finding them. So it's important to be a native speaker. It's important to read these guidelines and then to start annotating. After we identify this string, we have to check it against the tests that you will see are applied sequentially. Well, the end point is when we classify this multi-word expression in one existing type, or we consider it is actually not a multi-word expression, it's a regular word combination. When we look at the string of words, we must be aware that not all elements that appear one after the other are sometimes part of the same expression. So, for instance, in the news took John by surprise, what we are going to look at is only took by surprise, because John can be replaced by other names or other nouns in general. Yeah? But in the next sentence, took the bull by the horns, which is syntactically similar to the first one, we will have to consider the noun that follows the verb, because we cannot replace it even with its plural form, needless to say, with other nouns. Okay. Now, when we classify multi-word expressions, we are going to be aware and to consider their part of speech. Yeah. So we are going to talk about several classes: verbal, nominal, modifier, functional or pronominal ones,
here we will focus only on verbal ones, but we have to be aware that other parts of speech are also possible. So we'll go for well, I will present you this part because we will have. There are even some problematic cases with verbal multi-word expressions. When we are not sure if we should classify them among verbal or nominal ones. Think of non-finite verbal forms. Yeah. So we will first decide what part of speech they belong to, and this we are talking about candidates right now, right? So a candidate string of words, we have to decide what part of speech it belongs to. So and for this, we look at its distribution. If its distribution in sentences resembles that of a determiner, conjunction, or adposition, then this is probably a functional multi-word expression, and we'll have to go to that respective decision tree, which we are not going to look at now. If it's not a determiner, then you have to check if it's maybe a modifier, so adjectival, adverbial. Otherwise, you'll have to check if it's a verbal one or a nominal one, and so on. Yeah. So depending on the distribution, we will have different decision trees, which we are going to consider for our analysis. Now, I presented previously sometimes of verbal multi-word expressions, but the categories that are used were used in Parsim and are used in Unidive now are these ones. Light verb constructions, which are further subdivided into light verb constructions pool. And this is the case to give a lecture when the verb does not have any semantic contribution to the meaning of the whole expression. And we have light verb constructions cause. And here the verb has a semantic contribution. This causative meaning that it brings. Yeah, like to give someone a headache, you cause that person to have this problem, a headache. Then there are verbal idioms. We have some abbreviations for all these classes. The inherently reflexive verbs. Well, in English, these are rare cases. In Bulgarian, in Romanian, these are frequent cases. They are not easy to deal with, actually. You know that the reflexive, the appletive can have different meanings, and we have to distinguish between those different meanings and to choose only those occurrences where we have this inherently reflexive meaning. Then there is this category of verb particle constructions, which is further subclassified into verb particle constructions full and semi. In the first example, we have to do someone in, so to do in. This is the verb. This is the expression. Someone is not part of it. To eat up, meaning it all. Yeah. So it's a semi non-compositional construction. It's not fully non-compositional. The latter example. And then we have a few cases in English, but more cases in Asian languages, for instance, of multi-verb construction, so combinations of verbs. Some of these categories are considered universals. Universals meaning that they occur in all those 26 languages that Eva presented. That are present in the corpus. And these are LVC and VID, so the first two. Others are semi-universals in the sense that they occur in many languages, but not in all. This is the case for the others. And what I haven't represented here, because for Bulgarian and for Romanian, we haven't coined them. Because we didn't have this need when annotating. There are language-specific classes. For Italian, for instance, they were defined. One, actually was defined. And I think for Hebrew also, but I'm not sure this is the second language word. No, Swedish, I think, rather than Hebrew. For Italian, however, for sure, they do have one language specific type. Is because they have those clitics that do attach to the nouns, and they need to offer a treatment for them. Okay, so after we have decided that a certain string of words is a potential multi-word expression and it has the distribution of a verb, yeah, we have to just a minute. Okay. We have to test it, so to be sure that it is a multi-word expression, and if it is, to decide to what category it belongs. This is the decision tree, let's say the upper part of the decision tree for verbs, which is available at this link here. Be seen by participants online, because I think I shared the whole screen, but yes, okay. So it is available online, and here it is. So it's the same as I had in the picture on the slide, but here you also have links that do work. Okay, so we will start from the top of the decision tree and apply each test. So the first test, let's say, depending on the answer to this test, if it's yes or no, we will continue with what's beneath the respective answer. It's rather difficult to follow this. It's easier to have an example to work with. I have here this snippet of a sentence, let's say. The fate of the republic rests on your shoulders. Yeah, so let's say this is a part of our corpus, and here we have this string rests on your shoulders, and we have a feeling that this could be a multi-word expression, and we have to be sure, so to test it. First of all, as I said, we have to decide if all words occurring here should be considered part of it. Yeah. So what about, so rests? I have the feeling it should be there, but your actually can be replaced by rests on my shoulders, on someone else's, on John's shoulders, and so on. As a native speaker, I know that your, so this determiner, can be replaced by other words. So this means that we shouldn't consider it as part of the expression, whereas the rests on shoulders, yeah, I think it's constant, it's always there. So I will test them together as one candidate multi-word expression. And I will go to the decision tree. And here the first test is has to do with the head of this. Remember, it rests on shoulders. Yeah, this is our expression. And the question here is, do I have a unique verb as a functional syntactic head of this whole string? Well, the answer is yes. This is the verb who rests. Yeah, so I will have to continue here. Yes, so I will go here. The answer was yes. And I will have to apply this second test, which says, does this verb have exactly one lexicalized dependent D? Well, I have rests on shoulders. On shoulders is one dependent. I treat it as one syntactic unit.
So yes, it is indeed only one lexicalized dependent. I will continue here. Yeah. So I will continue with test 3, lex such. Yeah. And this test asks us if there is a lexicalized subject in this expression. No, there isn't in this string that I'm considering. Yeah? So I will continue on this with this branch here. Test structural test 4. What is the morphosyntactic category of the dependent? Yeah. Well, we had on shoulders. Yeah. What is this? Well, it's not a reflexive critic. I don't know if they can hear me or if yeah. It's not a particle, it's not a verb, it's an extended NP, noun phrase, yeah? I have a preposition and the noun, that's an extended NP. So I will apply this LVC specific decision tree if I'm here, yeah? Here we have links between the different decision trees, so I will follow this. And I have the LVC specific decision tree. Yeah, so from the general tree, I'm now in that tree that is specific to LVCs. So the first question here is the noun abstract in this string? Well, shoulders is not an abstract noun. It is a concrete one. So the answer here is no. In this case, this answer shows me that I do not have to do it light verb construction. So I will have to exit, which means go back in the general tree. If it works, it should work. Okay. So I was here, I applied the test, and the answer was no. Yeah, so I'm here now. I have to test if this is VID, so to apply the VID specific test. And the first one here is cran from cranberry. Remember, yeah, so those words that occur only in expressions, they never occur in the language alone, well, in other combinations, I mean. So, do I have to do with any cranberry word within this string? No. So the answer is no. I will have to, yeah, no. So I will continue with VID, but with the next text. Does the regular replacement of a component leads to an expected meaning shift? Let's see. Let's try with something else instead of shoulders, let's say. Rests on back, arms. Does I still have this meaning to rest on someone's shoulders, so to be someone's duty to do something, responsibility? No. So if I have this unexpected meaning shift, this means, yeah, so the answer here, yeah, is yes. So this shows me that the string rests on shoulders is a VID. Yeah, so I have not only established that it is a multi-word expression or a verbal one, I have also classified it already. Yeah, so I know it's a VID type of verbal multi-word expression. So that's how we work with these decision trees. Well, that was the presentation, but it's easier to follow the decision tree instead of this example. Okay, that was this last slide. So remember, we always identify a candidate. We test its distribution. It's vital, yeah, to establish to what part of speech it might belong if it is a multi-word expression. And we go to that decision tree specific to that part of speech. We only work with verbs now, yeah? But we already have guidelines for other parts of speech. They are, well, they are on Google Drive, but available only to people who are involved in their development. We presented them in a previous event, so they do exist. Nelda can confirm. She participated in the other event. So what is challenging in this process is how to follow even from my experience at least, is how to go through the branches of these trees to make sure you never skip, you follow the right answer, so that you reach a certain decision, whatever that is. We are not dealing with multi-word expressions, or if we do, what type that is. So this would be what we are going to test on Wednesday morning. If you have questions regarding all three sessions, we are happy to answer them. If you want to sort of start now to check if you've understood this process, to make sure on Wednesday we can work as specialists for the corpus. Yes, please.
Maybe if you've gone through the tree exactly the way you should, what kinds of validations do you go through? Do you use third-party validation methods or some kind of other way to check whether somebody has gone through the tree?
From experience, we don't have any let's say automatic. We use something semi-automatic in the sense that when the process is over, when we finish annotation, there is a consistency check. And from this, the results of this consistency check, we understand if the annotators, have worked in the right way or in a similar way or not. If different annotators reach the same conclusion, so annotate a certain string in the same way, this consistency check does not tell you if they did it in the right way or not. Yeah, so we cannot be sure. Only reaching different conclusions would be a signal that something went wrong. We do not care if those different annotations come from the same annotator or from different annotators, because we are all humans, we all make mistakes, right? We get tired, we consider, we see things differently. So if I have the same string and I annotate it today, and tomorrow I have to do it again, I might reach a totally different conclusion, of course, or a different annotation, yeah? So it's not easy.
Maybe it's gonna work out.
Okay.
Using AI models to actually use external validation.
Well, we haven't tested this, but if Eva has something more to add to this,
I mean, we haven't we actually we haven't found anything that is and we haven't tested anything, but we haven't found anything that is good for languages as Bulgarian and Romanian. So yeah,
It's gonna be very difficult to even find AI validation.
yeah, at the moment.
Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else with questions?
I wanted to ask if there is examples in Romania for multi-verbal compositions.
I think we have maybe two or something. I cannot tell them. I don't know them by heart, but I remember. But they were not annotated like this because the number is quite low. We have a category other. So whenever you cannot find a category, you put everything in other. But others are very low in number in Romanians, and they are included here. Actually. Thanks for the question. It's a very good one, because here in these guidelines, you can see at the top these buttons, let's say, I don't know how they are called. And these are the language codes. These are the 26, I hope, languages that are present in the corpus. And the guidelines should contain examples for all problems in these languages. So if now you can see that only the English button is active, but I can also activate, for instance, the Bulgarian language, and you noticed how the Bulgarian examples showed up. Yeah, I can, for instance, the Romanian ones. Yeah, so whenever you have a test with examples in English, you should also have examples in all these active languages here. Yeah, so you can easily find like this if they were presented, introduced here in the guidelines, and they are available for the respective language. It's you can easily understand them because you also have the glossing and the translation of the example, so it's easy to follow. And there is also a color code, let's say, used here. So whatever is in green is a multi-word expression. Whatever is red for the same language means it's not a multi-word expression. Yeah. So and also if you work with languages that are in the same family with the language you want to add here, you can check those close, let's say, languages to get inspired to see how others treated the same phenomenon. You may agree or disagree with arguments with that treatment, and this is important for the community as a whole. So guidelines can be adjusted all the time. Well, not every month, but we are versioning them, yeah.
Thank you.
You've heard it several times mentioned rest on shoulders as a potential multi-word expression. In fact, it only works as one if you say whose shoulders. So does rest on shoulders, rest on somebody's shoulders, where the somebody can vary. So maybe it's part of a broader question: how much more grammatical information do you include in the description of the expression, and what kinds what kinds can it be? Because of that.
Well, when you annotate the expression, you do not assign any linguistic information to it. Only if you create a lexicon, a dictionary of those, you can add such information. And as shown, the granularity, the different types of linguistic information that's available depends on various themes. For Bulgarian and Romanian, actually we try to cover more of all different linguistic levels, with exceptions being formulated, and whatever goes by the rule is not included, although we covered less lexical material.
Yes, for this bilingual sort of resource that we extracted from WordNet. So for these cases, we try to provide as much information as possible, but they are a small amount, around 1,000. So.
It's a member of the team who developed this.
I'm just. Okay, so I'm just reminding my friends and colleagues that we use such slots that are variable, that need to be filled in for the expression to be grammatical, as in Professor Drzeżanski said it works against grammatical only if we specify whose shoulders. And it might not also be only be it is usually possessive pronoun, but it might be passive adjective or even a PP, a prepositional phrase with some name or noun of the possessor. So some expressions are not take such slots that should be filled with grammatical expression. So as for the whole to be, so that the whole should be grammatical in this way, otherwise it's not.
But within the parsim annotation, there is no such information. I mean, you annotate only the lexicalized parts of the multiword expression.